Hello there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fantasy for the Ages, the show where father and son sit down and talk about fantasy, sci fi, and whatever else we want to nerd out about. Today, I've got a Just Jim episode for you. No Zach here. This one is just me coming at you. I am going to be going solo here to talk about highlights of my 2022 fantastic reads. I got through so much here over the last 12 months that's been a lot of fun to enjoy, to experience, and I'm going to bring it to you now and share what I take away from that and give you a little highlight of what's to come in 2023 as well. If you like this video, if you enjoy the things I go through, be sure to literally like the video here on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and look at all the other content that we have out there that we'd love to share with you. And there are other ways you can connect with us: Discord, various social medias, all that's down in the show notes, and we'd love to know you better. Usually at this point, I check in with my son, but since he's not here today, I won't ask how he's doing. I hope you're doing great. We've got Emmeline with us in the Discord. Hope you're doing well, Emmeline. She says hello. Totally different time zone, so I'm recording in the morning, and she's actually in the evening. We have such a grand world that we can do things with. We also talk about what we're drinking when we record an episode. I mentioned it's morning, 10 a.m. So while there's that rule, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Yeah, not enough by me. So Emmeline's having some liquor in her coffee. I've got water. So, amaretto as well. Good, good. So, Emmeline, you are drinking for us today. Thank you very much. And you do win. Well, let's get into this. There's so much to talk about. So many fantastic books I've enjoyed. And I'll let you know up front, this is a spoiler-free episode. I'm going to tell teeny little bits about lots of books that I read about, but nothing reviewing, releasing plot points or anything like that. Hopefully, you'll hear some things that will perk your interest, and you might add them to your own TBRs, or you might go, ooh, I've read that, and that's fun too. I do have a lot of books that I've covered. Some of them I've already made episodes about. So, again, not going in depth. This is just an overview because, okay, in preparing this episode, I looked through very carefully everything I've read. I've made it through 108 books this year. That is a new record for me, at least as long as I've been keeping track. 108, and I think I'm going to finish two more here because I've got just a few days left. I'm in the final week of the year now. It has been so fun to do so much reading. And my son, he's, got maybe a third of that, a quarter of that. He's like, gee, it'll be nice when I have time to read. I don't know. You get older and you don't go out to the bar as much or something. I just have time. In fact, my wife and I, we get done at the end of the day. We've watched a TV show and we look at each other. Time to turn off TV and just read? Yeah. And we may spend an hour or two before we go to bed just reading good books. I've got a good wife. I like that. So, with all of this reading, you'd think I'd made some real headway on my to be read list? Ha! Hardly, because I keep learning about great books from people like you interacting with us on Discord and Twitter. So I've got nearly 1,000 books waiting on my TBR, and I could have more. I have a little restraint. But that's okay. I'm never going to run out of things to read, and that's a happy place to be. Now, why will it be a worthwhile episode for you to listen to me talk about all the books I've read? Well, again, I'm hoping to tantalize you with some things you hadn't thought about yet that you'll consider reading in the year ahead, or years ahead, depending where you stick them on your list. But I'm also giving out some awards. I have specifically thought about these books, and some of them are award worthy. Now, there's no trophies going out in the mail, there's no monetary prizes I'm giving out. These are just to give awards that you may or may not agree with. Emmeline says it's just about the glory. In some cases, some of these awards are not ones people would want to win, actually. But most of them are worthy awards. And maybe I'll make this an annual thing that they can look forward to. Will they win the award or not? Because, of course, they're going to watch my episode and learn to see with bated breath, did they win this year? Okay, let's kick this off. I always have two different tracks of reading going on, and sometimes three at the same time. So I got to explain that a little. I'm always reading something on my Kindle app. And I love that because it syncs between my phone and my iPad. I prefer to read on the bigger iPad, but if I'm stuck in the grocery line or um, I'm waiting at a doctor's office or something, I can pull out my phone and pick up right where I left off. So that's pretty sweet. But I'm also at the same time, well, not at the exact same time, but I'm also listening to things on the Audible app. And I'll do that at different times when I can't actually physically read, like exercising or doing chores or driving somewhere. I found it's bad to physically read while driving. So, Audible, I've got something totally different that I'm listening to. And then sometimes I'm also reading something old school, physically opening a book. I don't prefer that method. It's clunky. I need a bookmark. It doesn't fit as comfortably in my hand. I'm reading something right now in a pretty good size paperback, and it's just annoying having to hold this open and not lose my page. And I hate when I wrinkle a page, so I also have to hold it careful. But anyways, right now I'm reading in three different modes, and I can do that. My mind just jumps between the books, and I don't lose track. I know not everybody can do that, but that does help me get through 108 freaking books in a year, so it works for me. My first read of the year, and I'll kind of clarify which kind of read these are. So my first was Kindle. On the Kindle app, I was finishing up the Dresden Files. So this was actually a series of books. I was on the back half of the Dresden Files as we moved into 2022. So my first book to finish in 2022 was Small Favor, Book 10. And I could not read the Dresden Files fast enough. If you haven't read these, I really encourage you to check them out. They're so fun. And you can read them, you can consume them pretty quickly, but you can also go back and reread and you'll get more out of them. I know, Emmeline, you were with me reading these as I did some of my first reviews on them. I do have a review out for every one of the Dresden File books that are out there now, and one on just all the short stories, too. So, good stuff. Definitely look at those. I went from beginning of January at book 10 all the way through book 17, Battleground, by mid February. So 6 weeks of just plowing through book after book after book. It was great. And I also fit short stories in as to where they fit in the midst of the books. I recommend that. On our Discord, I do have a Dresden Files recommended reading order list that you could check out. Because the short stories are not fluff. They're really essential reading in the Dresden Files. You can find most of them in two collections, Side Jobs and Briefcases. So I finished both of those during 2022. It was awesome to finish that series. Now, the series is not done, it just only goes through book 17 right now. So, finishing book 17, it's a great place to have to wait a little for more Dresden Files content. Because actually, that book, so awesome, it gets my first award of today. It gets the Almost Made Me Cry award. I don't cry. Okay, I'm not wired that way. But if you can maybe make the eyeballs get a little damp, okay, you've done it. You hit me somehow. You got the feels. And Battleground, so heck of an accomplishment, Jim Butcher. Nicely done. Along this same time, I enjoyed four different things on Audible. Because again, Dresden Files was all Kindle app. But interspersed, I'm moving through some Audible books. First, I listened to a throwback to my days enjoying zombie apocalypse literature. I did a ton of that stuff. before I got into really trying to check out some of the high quality content I'd missed. Zombie Apocalypse, not a lot of it's high quality, but it is fun. Okay, it's good stuff that I enjoy to read. So, one of these was Zombie Road, Book 7. David A. Simpson is the author. It's a delightful continuation of a story in which I've previously invested. I mean, I read the first six, but I hadn't touched it in over a year. So I got into that one. Then I got a couple of books on Audible that were rereads for me. Of course, this time listening. The Alloy of Law and Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson. Now, these are the first two books of Era 2 of Mistborn. And the final book of Era 2, The Lost Metal, I knew was coming out in late 2022. So I wanted to do a reread. But I also realized book 3, The Bands of Mourning, I had that book waiting and I'd never gotten around to it. So there was no point to read it when I had read the other two so long ago. So first the reread, and I count that. I read them again, see? And then I went on to listen to Bands of Mourning. That was great. Really enjoyed it. And honestly, the first two as rereads, better than the first time. Way better. Okay, just I'd read a lot more of the Cosmere now, so there's more things clicking and connections. And if you have done that as well since you read those, it's fun to go back and read them now. You get it so much more. So there you go. I had those three done now and could wait until the Lost Metal would come out. We'll talk more about that later. The other two things I read during my Dresden Files adventure were more sequels in the zombie apocalypse world. Again, lots of such series out there, and I'd really invested in so many of them beforehand. So, okay, now what else have I missed? What has come about over the past year when I wasn't paying any attention? So I read Helldivers 7 Warriors by Nicholas Sansbury Smith. Now that's not really zombie apocalypse. It's apocalyptic literature, but it wasn't the zombies that screw up the world in that. It's something different. So it's more of a sci-fi, fantastical thing. And then, okay, straight ZA, Zombie Fallout 15 Sifting Through the Ashes by Mark Tufo. Again, these books will make no sense unless you read the entire series up to those points. None of the books take a long time to read through, and they're all out on Audible as well, so you can just listen to them or you can read them. I recommend just try the first couple and see if you're getting the author's style. And if you do, keep going, and if you don't, well, you didn't invest too much time or effort in it. Fun stuff. We're up to mid-February at this point. I took time to consume something totally new for me on Audible then. A full dramatic presentation, and it was an Audible only release of Impact Winter, a little dystopian spin on survival in a time of vampires. There's multiple actors, sound effects, the whole shebang, and again, only available on Audible. It was entertaining. High quality literature, not so much. But it was a nice diversion in the midst of things. It might be worth checking out. Next, it was time to move into two more series that would consume a goodly chunk of the year. Still on Audible, Emmeline will like this. I moved into Rhaenyra Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. A strong recommendation by Emmeline, as well as others who are backing her up. Technically 6 small books, these are packaged as 3 average size fantasy books, easily otherwise called The Adventures of Royce and Hadrian. I found the adventures and discoveries of this duo to be engaging and entertaining. They were well written and not entirely predictable. The gold of the series is the unusual relationship between the two protags, and their banter never gets old. As soon as I finished these 3 books, Theft of Swords, Rise of Empire, and Heir of Novron, I continued on into Rhaenyra Chronicles, which so far are all prequel stories of Royce and Hadrian, how they get to be at the point where we meet them in Rhaenyra Revelations. And there's plenty to tell. There's a lot of backstory on these characters. So while I consumed the four books that are already out there, The Crown Tower, The Rose and the Thorn, The Death of Dulgath, and The Disappearance of Winter's Daughter, along with some short stories, I'll be back to read more as Sullivan continues to add to the chronicles. Emmeline points out Book 5, Drummondor, is soon to come out. I Yeah, I don't think it's out yet. I have it planned to read in 2023. Have you seen it's come out yet? He's going to keep writing these though, because the fans are crying for it. She thinks it might be out. I'll have to go look again and see if it's there yet. Or you can do that now, Emmeline, while I'm talking. So, Rhaenyra, great place to spend some time. Zach is now into those books as well. Even as I spent the second half of February, along with March and April, in the Rhaenyra stories, on my Kindle app, I moved into The Expanse. Strongly recommended by Discordian Jake Stone Dog. This sci fi series was fantastic and was only barely beaten out by the Dresden Files as my favorite read of the year. I read through all 9 core novels, from Leviathan Wakes to Book 9, Leviathan Falls, which just came out in November of 2021. So the series had just wrapped up as I'm moving into 2022. And then there's a bunch of short stories and novellas that are really necessary reading, and I fit those in to the sequence in the way that they made the most sense. Again, you can find a recommended reading order list for this on our Discord. I finished Leviathan Falls near the end of May. Leviathan Falls brings home another award, the Superb Landing Award for 2022, recognizing how well James S.A. Corey landed the plane as the series concludes, as opposed to missing the runway or simply crashing and burning. See Hunger Games for that. Super strongly recommend The Expanse. And after I was done, I was able to watch and enjoy the TV adaptation that is available on Prime Video, which is quite well done. They still need to finish that. It doesn't cover the whole series, but what they covered fantastically. Hidden in the midst of my Expanse read is actually another award that I want to give out. This one, the shortest worthy read of the year, which goes to The Butcher of Anderson Station. At just 40 pages long, it qualified as the shortest story I read this year that was still truly epic. So there you go. Another trophy. Again, no money coming your way. I've got a few extra things I had time to read after I'd finished Rhaenyra, but while still reading The Expanse. Again, because I'm using different modes here. So on Audible, I attempted Terry Pratchett's Discworld again. In 2021, I'd read The Color of Magic, and it just wasn't my thing. But there are so many raving fans of this series. It was worth another try. So I listened to The Light Fantastic and then Sorcery. I almost DNF'd Sorcery. It's not that there's anything wrong with these books. So if you're Discworld fans, don't come at me here. Just understand this is subjective preference. They aren't my preferred style of fantasy fiction. Perhaps they're too goofy and discombobulated? I don't know. But I can tell you that for now, with so many other books I'm eager to read on my TBR, I have removed Discworld altogether. After this ill-fated second Discworld attempt, I moved on to something I was much more eager for. Andrzej Sapkowski's The Witcher series. I started with the haphazardly collected short stories of The Last Wish, and was entertained and intrigued sufficiently to continue. I was completely engaged and sucked in as I plowed through Sword of Destiny, Blood of Elves, The Time of Contempt, Baptism of Fire, The Tower of the Swallow, and The Lady of the Lake. Fantastic! And then I got to the final available book, Season of Storms, and sort of went, what the heck? As this book basically returns to the discombobulated format of stories from all over, all out of time sync, that I kind of had in the first book. I was basically left with, I guess I've had enough of The Witcher then. Accordingly, Season of Storms wins an award, the What Were You Thinking award for 2022. I finished listening to the Witcher books by mid July, but this leaves me to go back to what I was reading on Kindle and an actual physical format since April. I kind of skipped those, gotta cover those now. And I had some adventures. In early May, my younger brother lent me his hardcover editions of the first two seasons of Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. I'm not really sure what to call these comics or graphic novels, but they are an edgy blend of sci fi and fantasy that cover some serious topics while choosing not to take things too seriously. The first volume of Saga, which I rated 5 stars on Goodreads, earns the highest rated on Goodreads award for 2022, as more Goodreads reviewers agreed with the quality of this read than any other thing I enjoyed. It averaged 4.68 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. As I finished Leviathan Falls, my Kindle moved on to the Fionavar Tapestry, a trilogy that is the first published work of Guy Gavriel Kay. Our longtime Discordian and Patreon supporter Jordo had encouraged us to read this, one of his favorite classic fantasy reads. I'd been hearing about Guy Gavriel Kay, knew I'd need to explore him eventually, so it made sense to start at the beginning. Well, for me, this was not an easy trilogy to get through, and it earns the Really Wished I'd Liked It Better award, because I had high hopes that it simply didn't meet for me. Now, to be honest, this is not the take everyone has about this trilogy. Zach just finished it, and he loved it. He thought it was great. But for me, I had some specific issues with the way some topics are handled in the first book, The Summer Tree. And again, these specific things, Zach and I talked about them on our recent to read or not to read episode of the Fionavar Tapestry, and he does not have the same issues I do. So it could be just an old fart issue. I don't know. But subjectively, it didn't work for me. But I wanted to love this trilogy. I just didn't. So in the end, I'll admit, I only finished because I'd feel bad DNFing something that was so strongly recommended and loved by others. Well, and I hate DNFing anything. So I am glad I finished. And the second and third book were better than the first, but it wasn't an all time fave that I can't wait to go back to, because I won't. Nope, moving on. Now we're in the latter half of June, and I brought out a standalone sci fi book to read on my Kindle app, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I'd read The Martian a few years back, just before watching the movie, and loved it. Andy Weir did not disappoint with this book. He wove a creative and intriguing sci fi tale that again manages to make real science cool. I was never bored for a moment. I just dropped a Tiny Talk book blast on this one that you can find here on our channel. Honestly, I enjoyed every aspect of this book, so it gets another award. This one, the Best Sci-Fi Loner Award, as it's a standalone that's absolutely awesome. That brings us to the second half of the year. And with the start of July, I took on an ambitious, classic, sci fi fantasy hybrid read, first recommended to me by Drew McCaffrey, a previous guest here on our show, and has his own show, the Inking Out Loud podcast. The one he recommended was Gene Wolfe's initial classic, The Book of the New Sun. And I've heard it can be a challenge. And a lot of people rave about it, love it, and a lot of people never finish it. But I took it on. And because I'm a completionist, I went in with the full mindset that I would complete the sequence, 4 books, plus go right on to the follow up novel, The Earth of the New Sun. So a commitment to 5 books. The Book of the New Sun is not for the faint of heart. I went in with eagerness for Wolfe's masterpiece. There are whole podcasts just on this book series. And I found it initially interesting and unusual, quite original, but as time and reading went along, honestly, I found myself growing bored. The prose is elaborate, and I dare say over verbose. Wolfe utilized a prodigious vocabulary, and on top of that, he just flat out made up words as he created this novel collection. I've been told that this is a creative work that you don't truly appreciate until you do a reread. And I'm like, okay, I get that. I'm a big Wheel of Time fan, and it's so much better on the reread. But I loved Wheel of Time the first time through. This, ugh, no, I did not appreciate it enough the first time through to ever want to do a reread. I have too much else I still want to get to. I will say that reading book 5, The Earth of the New Sun, was an excellent move, as I far better understood what the heck was going on in the first 4 books after reading that follow up. So that was a smart move of me. And as think about these books, having read them now and all the plot points, I do appreciate them better than right after I finished. Because when I finished, I was just exhausted and so done and ready to move on. Now, that kind of gets me to why this gets an award, because I do have an award for this one. I read the 5 books, so the 4 of the core series, and then that extra book, the sequel, in an omnibus edition. So while I counted each novel separately in my total 2022 book count, the omnibus was 1,931 pages. It gets the 2022 Behemoth Award as the single largest book I cracked open this year. I'm thankful that along the 5 weeks it took me to slog through Gene Wolfe's massive tomes, that I had some terrific audiobooks to break things up. First up was The Law, a novella of the Dresden Files that Jim Butcher dropped in July, which I immediately took a day and sucked up. In fact, I was so eager for this one, I squeezed it right in the middle of one of the Witcher books that I'd been listening to. I just stopped listening to that one, listened to The Law, it's not very long, and then went back to the Witcher book. It gives us a little more of the story beyond book 17, Battleground, and I was happy for just a taste more. Again, a quick listen, definitely worthwhile. My next listen, when I get to finishing those Witcher books, was a total departure from my usual reading, which everybody should do once in a while. I checked out a standalone novel by V.E. Schwab called The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Something it initially had going for it was the narrator on Audible is Kate Mulgrew, formerly playing Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager. And that's a great show. I loved her as an actress. So to hear her voice reading this to me was delightful. The story is one of love, magic, and the supernatural, with some unique and refreshing spins on how one better be careful what one wishes for. I enjoyed this book, in part for its freshness, partly for the narrator, and in great part how well written it is. It's a masterpiece. I've added more V.E. Schwab to my TBR, even though this is outside the norm of what I like. I mean, romance is part of it. You guys know I don't do romance. But Schwab's skill in writing was spectacular. I want more. So, this novel actually wins an award. I call it the Mosh Pit Award, as more people added this to their Goodreads lists as something they read this year than any other book I touched. Huge following, lots of people loved it. I've got 4 more books I listened to via Audible as I worked through July and into early August, but I want to note that here also I started a new challenge, with Zach and I starting up our Dragon Riders of Pern book club on our Discord server. We have committed to reading all 26 Pern books, most of them by Anne McCaffrey, but some co-written with her son, Todd, and some by Todd alone, and even one by her daughter. Now, 16 of these I've read before, but the following 10 will be new to me. We've got a few of you joining us on this journey, one that will take all of 2023 to finish. Right now, we are on book 9 of the series, but we've got it all plotted out and we will finish in December of 2023. So, right here in the midst of my 2022 is where we took on the first book, Dragonflight. Man, I totally love the Dragon Riders of Pern series. If you have not checked that out, I mean, it's classic, but it spans decades. Go back and listen. So good. Or read. You don't have to listen. I'm physically reading these. Most of them I have in hardcover or paperback editions. A couple I've got is Kindle. I'm not listening to any of these actually. With The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue behind me, I moved into the grimdark genre for the first time of 2022, and it was an excellent entry. I read Mark Lawrence's Broken Empire trilogy, Prince of Thorns, King of Thorns, Emperor of Thorns. I consumed all 3 books in 9 days. I literally couldn't stop listening. Fantastic. But, disclaimer here, one must enjoy grimdark. If that's not you, stay away from these books, because all the usual grimdark, all the staples of that genre, and all the things it can trigger, oh my goodness, they're on full display in this series. So, you are warned. The final audiobook I listened to while finishing the Book of the New Sun was a quick dip back into Mark Tufo's zombie apocalypse world, the setting of the zombie Fallout series, but this was a separate novel called Timothy. It's an adjacent novel, and some of the core series characters do make an appearance, a very fleeting appearance in Timothy. But the book is about Timothy, a creep of a man who becomes a zombie. And it's freaking disgusting. I mean, it really lets you try to get in the experience of becoming a zombie. This book was over the top in gross and gore and wins the don't really need this award from me because I don't really need this. Ugh. There are 2 sequels to this and I removed them from my TBR. I do not want to think of Timothy anymore, and this is probably the last I will ever talk of him. Now, props to writer Mark Tufo, because he warns you going into this book what type of book you're getting. I should have believed him. I should have listened and just stopped. Oh. Okay, I've got a different award to give out for something related to the next book I read. Jumping back over to a Kindle read. While I was reading the Broken Empire trilogy, I couldn't stop raving about the books on our Twitter. And author Mark Lawrence, he jumped in numerous times, thanking me for the praise of his books, encouraging my reading, pointing him to another book, Road Brothers, which is a book of short stories that jump back in time, multiple prequel stories of Jorg Ankrath and his Road Brothers. I never would have noticed that book. So I did go back and then read that one right after finishing The Broken Empire. I was glad for a little more background and flavor to add to what I had enjoyed in the trilogy. So, for Mark Lawrence's engagement with me on Twitter, he wins the Solicitous Author Award, taking the time to notice and respond to a fan with enthusiasm and repeated interactions. Way to go, Mark Lawrence. I should almost mail him a sticker or something. In early August now, I read the second of our Pern book club readings, Dragon Quest, a strong sequel to the opening book, Dragonflight. And our book club all pretty much agreed it was much better than Dragonflight. Also at this time, I began listening to another fantasy trilogy, the Night Angel trilogy by Brent Weeks. Really fun read, with a considerably different tone from The Broken Empire. While there are still serious events and themes involved, there was a lightness to the writing. It's not grimdark, okay? The focus was just kind of a breath of fresh air, and I appreciated that change of tone. Also, the young characters evidenced a naivete that I found charming. I plowed through all 3 of those books in a 2-week span of August. There is a fourth book coming out that I'll probably squeeze in somewhere in 2023. Back to Kindle, I checked off another standalone book from my TBR, the final published work of Roger Zelazny, called A Night in the Lonesome October. One of my early major fantasy reads was The Chronicles of Amber. I've mentioned them on this podcast before. Zelazny started that series in 1970 and finished it up in 1991, so big chunk of time it covers. The books were amazing, though I wonder how well they may hold up, because long time ago that I read them. I've absorbed a lot more since, and the world has moved on. But regardless, I loved them, and Zelazny holds a special place in my memories. So it was wonderful to return to something else he wrote right at the end of his career. This was a fun, quirky tale. It's a quick read, a murder mystery told from the perspective of a dog. And it's a perfect October read for those of you who celebrate Halloween in particular, certain kinds of supernatural, spooky monsters and stuff of that time. Many of them are in it, but seen from a very different perspective. It's just good fun. We've made it to late August now, and my reading was still going strong. I moved to our third book of the Pern Book Club, Dragon's Song, which is also book one of the Harper Hall trilogy. And it was fantastic. I own it. So this and the previous Pern books, again, were old school, physical books I'm reading. On my Kindle, I started another long recommended series, particularly recommended by Jordo, The Deathgate Cycle. This is a 7-book series with a lot of love from fantasy fans who've been paying attention since the 80s. It's written by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman of Dragonlance fame. I'm still reading this series as I found the early books honestly a little dull. Now I've got 6 of them done now. I just have the last one waiting. And the last 2 of them that I've read have been fantastic. So this is a series that kind of sets some foundational things in place and then builds and adds and then the intensity and the bigger picture all comes together. And I can understand now why people look back so fondly on this because they've got the memories of the whole series. But just as a first time person, the first 3 books, they were rough for me. I just there wasn't anything wrong with them. I just wasn't getting into them. I was having to make myself read. And I've read so much this year that sucks me in, and that makes this a little tougher. I will finish it. I've just taken a little pause before finishing book 7 while I try to get a few other things done that I wanted to finish. So also in August, on Audible, I tried my first John Scalzi book, The Kaiju Preservation Society. This came out just back in March, so a very recent book. It was getting lots of raves, so I gave it a shot. Great read, very entertaining. Scalzi writes fantastical sci-fi with just the right balance of humor in this book. I went ahead and added more Scalzi to my TBR after this, and you can find a Tiny Talk episode on our YouTube channel all about this book. To finish August and move into September, I went back to Mark Lawrence, reading his sequel to the Broken Empire trilogy, this time The Red Queen's War. The 3 books, Prince of Fools, The Liar's Key, and The Wheel of Ashheim, are set in the same world and at the same time as the Broken Empire books. So they're still grimdark, but they definitely have a different tone of grimdark from the Broken Empire. This trilogy, the Red Queen's War, is nowhere near as dark. In fact, it's rather silly at times and has an overall much lighter tone. I didn't find the story quite as tight as Broken Empire, but I still enjoyed them very much. And I moved through each book a week at a time, so didn't take me very long to get through them. I still recommend them, especially if you enjoyed the Broken Empire. There is a little interplay between these 2 series. Very good. Now, my Kindle reading since September has been consumed with 2 things. The books of the Deathgate cycle, I mentioned that, and then individual books I'm reading as a judge for the Right Hive Indie Ink Awards. These books I've been assigned rather than chose, and I appreciate having my perspective broadened through these books, things I never would have picked probably on my own. So far, I've read two of the five I've been assigned: A Bargain with the Fey King, which is book one of Megan Van Dyke's Courts of Fairy series, and Awakening, book one of Lucy A. McLaren's The Commune's Curse. And I'm hoping to finish my third book of the competition, Perception Check by Astrid Knight, before the end of the week. I'm almost there, like 87%. I'll get her done. Of those three books, I'm not going to say much about here because, again, part of a competition, but I will say Perception Check is by far my favorite of these three. Along the way, then, I've also read as part of our Pern book club the following fantastic additional books: Dragon Singer, Dragon Drums, The White Dragon, Merida, Dragon Lady of Pern, and Narilka's Story. I mean, these books just keep coming. Every 2 to 3 weeks, we're chomping through another. Fantastic, so much fun, and of course, loving being able to talk to other people about them on our book club. One of whom is with us here now. Hey, Amis, good to see you. I'm trying to finish book 9, Dragon's Dawn, by the new year. So I'm close. It's longer than the other ones we've read so far, but it's so good. And I'm going to get there. The rest of my 108 books have been on Audible, and a diverse group of books. Very quick. Gil's All Fright Diner by A. Lee Martinez. A silly little dramedy, sort of set in our world and time, but with the supernatural being quite natural. So there's ghosts, vampires, demons, werewolves, etc. It's a quick little read. I enjoyed it. Two more of Nicholas Sandberry Smith's Helldivers series, Book 8, King of the Wastes, and Book 9, Radioactive, which leaves me ready for when Book 10 comes out in early 2023. Again, got to read that whole series if you're going to have any interest in checking out the ones I just mentioned. Nosferatu by Joe Hill was another standalone novel I tossed in here. A creepy, supernatural, potentially holiday-themed thriller. It was different. I enjoyed it. The Sins of Our Fathers gets thrown in here, a final addition to The Expanse. This novella came out just this past March, gives us a small taste of the aftermath of the events in the final book of the core series of The Expanse. Definitely worth reading. Then I got Tagana, a standalone fantasy book, the next one that was written by Guy Gavriel Kay after the Fionavar Tapestry. And I so much loved this book over the Fionavar Tapestry. It's so good. Literally, my mind was blown by this is the same author. This is fantastic. Tigana. In fact, it gets one of my awards here. The Best Fantasy Loner Award. Again, it's a standalone book, but this time fantasy, and it's so worthy. Loved Tigana. Then I got to actually an exception, a Kindle read I squeezed in directly on drop day, although it took me 3 days to polish it off. Michael Livingston's Origins of the Wheel of Time. I've got a tiny talk elsewhere on our channel here dedicated completely to that book. Check it out to learn more. Oh, don't read Origins of the Wheel of Time if you haven't read all of the Wheel of Time, though. That's important, okay? Because there are spoilers throughout. But if you're a fan of that series, Origins is well worth reading. Back on Audible. Late October, I began my last series for 2022, John Gwynn's The Faithful and the Fallen. I'd added this to my TBR quite a while back, and it was great to get to it finally. Took me 6 weeks to work through these 4 fantastic books because they are hefty. Each one was like 24 hours of listening time. Of course, this is also because I needed to start Malice, book 1, 3 times before I could keep straight what the heck was going on. There was a lot of world building and a ton of characters introduced in that first book. And you've really got to be paying attention to keep it straight. Honestly, I might recommend you read this series as opposed to listen to it, or at least for book 1, Malice, because just listening It was so easy to get lost. I've talked all about that on one of my tiny talks because I've got a tiny talk for each one of those books. I love them so much. And there's a full to read or not to read episode dropping shortly. Actually, if you're listening to this when it drops, then that's already out. But it is not out at the time of my recording. I think it comes out on Sunday. Okay, 4 more Audible listens rounded out December. The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. Whoop whoop, finally got to the finish of Mistborn Era 2. And I dare say it even launches Era 3. It's a very satisfying conclusion to the 4-book arc of Mistborn Era 2. I loved it. I definitely recommend The Lost Metal. Then I listened to Soul Survivor by Dean Koontz. Here we're getting into sci-fi, supernatural, mystery, and intrigue. It's outside my normal genre, but was recommended by Spencer over at the Fantasy Files podcast, and he did not lead me wrong. It's not a long book, and it kept me thoroughly engaged. So, Soul Survivor, you can check that one out. Then I did Red Shirts by John Scalzi. Again, I told you, after I enjoyed him with the Kaiju Preservation Society, I went and added some other things in, so I got to the second one already before the year ended. Red Shirts is a very fun read. It's a spin on Star Trek, but in a significantly different manner and approach. It will not go down as a masterful work of prose anywhere. There will be no classes on this novel, but it was a heck of a lot of fun. So, Red Shirts. And now I'm listening to Peter Straub's masterpiece, Ghost Story. He passed away a few months ago, so I felt it was appropriate to check out a core reason he's an acclaimed novelist. And I'm loving it. I'm not even halfway through. I'm maybe a third of the way through it right now. I'm hoping I might finish it this week, but we'll see. I am mostly off this week, so I have some extra time for reading and such. But then I also decided to do podcasts in the middle of the day, so we'll see if I get it done. All that's left then is to look ahead, because that finishes what I covered in 2022. Man, what a great ride. So excited. You know, I'd only set a goal for 62 books in 2022, and I almost doubled that. So, what could I do in 2023? Well, I'm shooting for 100 as my goal. Because, I mean, I beat that this year, but maybe some of my books take me a little longer next year. In fact, 100 might be overly ambitious because of some of the things I specifically have on the schedule. So let me tease you with what's coming. Very early, here in January, I'm going to start the 10 core books of Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Each of these are monstrous in size, deep, hard to get into, people tell me. I pray it will not be Book of the New Sun all over again. I'm pretty sure it won't. This is more my style of fantasy. Then I've got Blake Crouch's Wayward Pines trilogy. I'm going to pick up the only thing of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere that I haven't read in full yet, and that's the White Sand graphic novels. There's 3 kind of hardcover editions you can get that I'm going to pick up. They're not cheap, but I'm going to go for it. I'm going to get those. Jim Butcher, he's got a different series I'm going to go check out, his 6-book Codex Alera. Okay, I'm going to do something now. I'm going to tell you something I'm going to read that I have committed to never read, and I've been worn down. I'm giving in to the pressure. I'm going to go ahead and read Patrick Rothfuss's The Kingkiller Chronicle. There's only 2 books out of a trilogy. And I said, until he writes book 3, it's been over a decade. I won't do it, but okay, you win. I'm going to do it. I'll read those 2 this year. Who knows? Maybe book 3 will surprise us and drop. I've got the 5-book Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks on my schedule. This is a return to the author of the Night Angel trilogy, which I loved, and it's supposed to be his stronger work, so I look forward to that. Then there's the 5-book Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. I've heard a lot of good things about. That is in the list of 100 books I'm going to get to. I'm going to go back to John Gwynne of The Faithful and the Fallen and read his next series of Blood and Bone. It's a trilogy. It's in the same world as The Faithful and the Fallen. It's just 130 years later. So I'm going to do the time jump and enjoy those books. Then I'm going to check out John Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series. I understand there's just 4 of those out so far. Zach has read the first one. He loved it. I moved them up, actually. They've been on my TBR farther down, but I'm going to go for that now. There's a couple of standalone novels by Blake Crouch of the Wayward Pines trilogy that I'm going to read that are somewhat different, more sci-fi-ish, Dark Matter and Recursion. I've added those in the list, so I'll go for that. And then the 4-book Hyperion Cantos series by Dan Simmons. Now that's a throwback. Some more classic sci-fi-ish fantasy that I'm going to check out. Now, if you were keeping track and counting as I listed things, that was not 100 books. Intermixed throughout all of that, oh yes, by the way, Wayward Pines, the show, it is based on that trilogy. Discord just asked. So I do understand it comes from that. So I haven't hit 100 in the midst of all these books, these classic, great reads everybody's raving about. I've thrown in a bunch of the dystopian and zombie apocalypse stuff that I just like to read anyways. My guilty pleasures. So many of them aren't high quality. I'm not going, wow, this is going to win a prose award, nothing like that, but I'm going to read them anyways just for fun. I've got a bunch of books and series by Jacqueline Druga, Joseph Zuko, Frank Tail, and Grace Hamilton. So you could look up those authors if you want to see which kinds of ones. And of course, if you're watching this video later, I'll have just splashed up some book pictures and you'll know exactly which ones I'm kind of looking at. I'll also squeeze a few things in I didn't mention. This is going to be the year of Sanderson after all, and I've got some secret novels that are coming my way. I did order the Kindle versions of those, so when they hit, I'll be diverting from plan to read, hey, Brandon Sanderson, what did you just dump into my reading list? Hope you've enjoyed the episode, and maybe you've gotten ideas for books to add to your TBR. Please share your thoughts on anything I've said below in the comments. Join us on Discord and interact with us there. Find us on Twitter or Mastodon, and you can share your thoughts there. Of course, if you want to add more things to my 1,000-book TBR, bring it. Let me know your recommendations, and we'll see where I can squeeze it in. It was fun to go through all of these again. If you do read something that you first heard about here, let me know. That just is a warm, fuzzy thing to know that I added value to what you end up reading in 2023. All right, let me run my outro because then you're going to see, except for those of you in Discord and you can't see or even hear this, but those of you watching this later, here's the reminder of the ways that you can interact with us, where you can find us in Discord and all the various social medias. It also points to our Patreon page. Both Emmeline and Amis, who are with us here, are Patreon supporters. For as little as $1 a month, you can join us in our live recordings and interact with each other and us, and sometimes your thoughts end up creeping into these shows. We love having people with us here for that, and thank you for your support if you choose to become a Patreon member. All right, I'll leave you now, and we'll talk to you next time.